It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Kohl.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Kohl. In the studio with me is Beth Decker. She's Executive Director of Safe Skies Maryland. I'm going to let Beth explain what Safe Skies Maryland is, and thank you for joining me today, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me. So Safe Skies Maryland is a conservation initiative. We're housed under Maryland Ornithological Society, and we're basically set up to address any anthropogenic factors of bird mortality. Okay. So anything that's human caused that we can hopefully have a human-related solution to.
And speaking of which, you have gotten into some legislative lobbying advocacy in your career. Mm-hmm. And you have 3 legislative focuses in the coming Maryland legislative session, right?
Yes.
So those 3 are what?
So the first one is one that everyone's hopefully already familiar with, and that is the Maryland Sustainable Buildings Act. And that will address bird safe standards, LEED Credit 55. Also to ban the release of balloons into the environment. And then to address the loophole in the stockpiles of carbofuran that we know have been a problem in the state.
Carbofuran is a banned pesticide. It's a toxic, very toxic banned pesticide, banned by the EPA. WNAV broke the news back in 2018 that carbofuran was used to kill the 13 bald eagles in the Federalsburg 2016 case. We also broke the news again in 2018 that carbofuran was used to kill 5 bald eagles in Easton, Maryland in 2017. It didn't stop there. I continued reporting about carbofuran and bald eagles, and we now have, since 2009, when the EPA banned carbofuran, 30 or more dead bald eagles by carbofuran poisoning. In the years before the EPA banned carbofuran, there were many more cases of it being used to kill Maryland wildlife. It's been going on for a very long time in Maryland, and so long, in fact, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service special agents that investigated the cases in the field, they called this the Carbo Wars. Those 30 or more bald eagles that have died in the past decade from carbofuran. 2009, Cordova, Maryland, 2 bald eagles. 2012, Easton, Maryland, 2 bald eagles dead. 2016, again, Federalsburg, 13 bald eagles dead. 2017, in Easton, 5 bald eagles dead. 2019, Cordova, 1 eagle dead. 2019, in Chestertown, 6 bald eagles and 1 great horned owl dead from carbofuran poisoning. And keep in mind, it takes 2 adult bald eagles to ensure the success of eggs or young eaglets. And without 2 adult bald eagles, those eggs or eaglets in the nest don't stand a chance. So it's likely more than 30 dead bald eagles in 10 years. Mm-hmm. You were following all this reporting by me.
Yes.
We ran into each other on, which you probably don't remember the date, but I looked it up. March 6, 2019, at an event in Annapolis.
Yeah.
And do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah. I said, what can we do to help eagles?
Right.
Yeah.
Regarding the carbofuran poisoning. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I kind of shrugged my shoulders and I said, it's already banned, right?
Yeah.
We then had the 2019 cases in Cordova and Chestertown. And in May, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources released information about those cases. Mm-hmm. Also in May, the Maryland Department of Agriculture put out a pesticide advisory. Mm-hmm. And that advisory, one small sentence of it caught my attention. While it is not illegal to possess an unregistered or banned pesticide, it must be stored in compliance with state regulations and may not be used, sold, or traded. That was one powerful sentence in that pesticide enforcement advisory. Mm-hmm. In June of 2019, I found and interviewed retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Special Agent Frank Consier, who spent a big part of his career investigating cases of carbofuran poisoning on the Delmarva Peninsula. And during the interviews with Frank, I asked him specifically about this loophole, possession loophole, and he said it would help law enforcement if there was a law, state law, banning the possession of carbofuran. After that interview, I introduced you to Frank. I then stepped away from all of this and haven't talked to you about it since, for the most part. I met you both for lunch one day. I met Frank in person because the interviews had been done over the phone.
Yeah, so Frank has been invaluable in helping really to bring us up to speed on how dangerous this carbofuran is, what it does to people, what it does to wildlife, that it gets into our groundwater. It just basically is a very toxic chemical. There is very good reason for its ban. But what none of us really understood was that just because it was banned didn't mean that we knew exactly what we should do with it after that. 10 years later, we're seeing that it is still in the environment. It is still being used. It's still posing a threat to law enforcement. And in order to support those efforts, I think everybody that we've talked to is in agreement that certainly regulating this through legislation, giving some teeth to what law enforcement can do, is certainly going to go a long way to protect Maryland citizens and wildlife. So Frank has been invaluable in really helping us to understand what this substance is, and being retired law enforcement can really help us to identify what things would support law enforcement to handle this so that we don't continue to see these problems.
I will also say that Special Agent Frank Consier has been invaluable to me as a source during this reporting of these cases. I spoke to him this morning. He said to me, he was in a meeting, he was here last month, he met with somebody, and his parting shot to that person, he said, was, "How many dead bodies do you want us to bring you before you take action?"
Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Kohl. In the studio with me today is Beth Decker, Executive Director of Safe Skies Maryland. She's going to be presenting the Maryland General Assembly with a bill that currently has sponsors to ban the possession of carbofuran. Carbofuran has been used to kill 30 or more bald eagles on the eastern shore of Maryland, along with other wildlife, since 2009, and many more before, but 2009 is when the EPA fully banned it. The reason why carbofuran has been used, according to Frank Consier, for this is in direct relation to regulated shooting areas on the eastern shore. These are areas they used to be called shooting preserves. They have captive raised birds that are released ultimately for hunters to shoot them. In addition to fish, on the top of the bald eagle menu preference list are ducks. Bald eagles and other wildlife will go after these ducks. And in some of the cases that retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Special Agent Frank Consier investigated, some of the people associated with these regulated shooting areas or shooting preserves were purposely poisoning wildlife, and this was in relation to loss of profits. Beth, what is this bill going to propose?
Yeah, so basically what we've done is really look at how can we support citizens, how can we protect the environment, how can we make sure that we're giving law enforcement the support that they need to investigate this, because these are costly, lengthy investigations, a lot of manpower, necropsies are expensive. Just to even investigate this really does cost the state a lot of money. But
it is a federally protected bird, so it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that's spending the large majority, right?
Yes, they're spending the money, but oftentimes it's our natural resources police that sort of investigate this. They're often the first responders. They're going out to these sites, and they may not even be aware that they're coming into contact with a substance that is so toxic that the dermal exposure, the respiratory exposure to these first responders presents a very significant threat to their safety. And then when they do find it, because it's not illegal to own it, it's just illegal to do anything with it, there's this loophole that allows it to sit on a shelf. And it's really important to remember, when you purchased this substance back when it was registered and you could use it, you bought what you thought you would use for 1 year, for that crop for 1 year. These bags that contain the granular form, these containers that have the liquid form, were not meant to live in perpetuity in someone's shed or on the shelf. So they break down after 2 or 3 years. So you have intentional use, and then you also have sort of unintentional breakdown of this material into the environment. Either way, it poses a threat to any person who is even hunting on that land, who doesn't know that there's an area where this stuff stuff is out, and it's gotten into carcasses, that are often laced with this material to enact, predator control. So their pets, their hunting dogs, anything like that, the people there, absolutely. There are cases where this has been very close to schools where kids are. For many, many, many reasons, it's high time that we really kind of close that loophole, that when law enforcement comes across it in the course of an investigation, that they can take it away. But either way, to support the community in doing this proposed legislation would allow for a buyback program. So you could voluntarily turn it in, get a little money back for it. It would be disposed of properly. And then you have 3 years to do that, after which time you would be held accountable. It's a Class C misdemeanor, so there's a fine associated pursuant to all of the other fines related to wildlife crimes. But interestingly enough, we do have, in the Code of Maryland, we do have something that addresses poisoning of wildlife. So it's not legal to poison wildlife. And it's important to know that carbofuran was never used as predator control. It was a pesticide that's use was canceled. So this is a misuse of this toxic substance, and it does pose a threat to citizens and to wildlife. Everybody rallied around DDT, and DDT was sublethal. This is lethal, and it's immediate, and it's so much worse.
For direction on the proper disposal of pesticides, contact the Maryland Department of Agriculture Pesticide Regulation Section at 410-841-5710, or you can email pest.reg@maryland.gov. Again, that's for directions on proper disposal of pesticides. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Kohl. In the studio with me is Beth Decker. She's Executive Director of Safe Skies Maryland. We're talking about what her organization is looking at for the coming legislative session. We just talked about carbofuran, but there's 2 more things on your to-do list.
Yes. So the next thing is to ban the intentional release of balloons, and it's very exciting because this has bipartisan support. Senator Lamb has introduced this, and it's already gained a lot of momentum. But we really want to point out that balloons, unlike other trash, they're so deadly because we know we would never go into the environment and sort of throw a plastic bag on the ground. We kind of all know that would do very bad things. But a balloon is really no different than a plastic bag. It's going to travel very far into the atmosphere. It can go sometimes up to 1,000 miles away. So it's going to end up in a marine environment. And when it does, it floats on the surface of the water, and it mimics the prey that a lot of the predatory animals, birds and marine mammals and all kinds of fish, everything eat this. And they mistake it for food. So they're actively selecting to eat trash. And then the trash has a very poor likelihood of being passed through the way that a hard plastic would. It obstructs things. It can cause an animal to starve. So there was a recent report in March of 2019 called A Quantitative Analysis Linking Seabird Mortality and Marine Debris Ingestion. And the authors of this study said that when a bird ingests a balloon or a soft piece of trash like that, plastic trash, it is 32 times more likely to die of that ingestion. So one of the most significant things that we can do to help these struggling populations of seabirds and all other marine animals is to just simply ban the intentional release of plastic trash, i.e. balloons, into the environment. So hopefully that's a no-brainer for folks. We certainly can come up with a lot of different ways of celebrating things, but causing this type of damage to the environment, now that we know that that's what it does, it just doesn't seem like a reasonable choice anymore.
1 billion birds a year die through strikes into buildings.
Yes.
That's your third focus.
Yeah. So the Maryland Sustainable Buildings Act really identifies some of the problems associated with this trend that we have in the use of all glass. So fortunately, glass is quite cheap now to build a building with, and everybody likes the way that it looks. And so now we're seeing, instead of the use of glass, we're seeing the near 100% use of glass. So the building envelope, which is going to live in our environment for 50 or more years, is all glass. Glass is energy inefficient. It is the most inefficient material that you can build with. And it also kills a billion birds a year. And these are not birds that, but for the presence of glass, would have died otherwise. They're healthy, they're migratory, they're literally the best of the best. So this is a way of sort of artificially selecting out the healthiest members of our bird populations at a time when the United Nations has said, in addition to climate change, the loss of biodiversity is one of the most threatening things to life on the planet now. So
Your
this is
bill would say what?
So the bill simply says, hey, when we're using state money to build and or operate a building, we want that building to be energy efficient. We want that building to incorporate the best known practices in sustainable design. So therefore, LEED Credit 55, when it's employed, impacts energy efficiency. You can save, a 10-story building over the course of 10 years can save on heating and cooling costs in the amount of over $1 million. It's significant. Yeah. Not to mention the fact that saving bird lives, absolutely. Birds, whether or not you're a huge fan of birds or not, are something that we have to have. They consume pests that we could not live with the amount of pesticides necessary in our environment to produce food if we didn't have the help of birds.
So, I often see people asking me, what can people do to help you with this stuff?
So the thing that is most encouraging right now is that we're seeing communities sort of have this resurgence of interest in getting involved locally and at the state level in common sense legislation, things that they know are going to address their most immediate needs. So I would say contact us, get involved, be willing to talk to your legislators. Legislators absolutely love to hear what is most important to you and why, and also to be thanked for the very good work that they do in introducing these bills, in advocating for them, in seeing them through, and basically representing us with this hard work. So I would also say thanking the legislators who are able to do this work for us.
Where can people find out more information?
www.safeskiesmaryland.org. And we have some links up there already to these different efforts, but really getting on our mailing list and going with us to do the lobbying work and sort of get that information out there. We can all be more educated consumers of information and consumers of products, and in that way we can really start to make fundamental changes that will have the impacts to conserve wildlife and conserve our way of life in the ways that we hope.
Thanks for your time today, Beth.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
If you still have pesticides such as Carbofuran, do not pour it down sinks, toilets, sewers, or put it in the environment. Again, for direction on the proper disposal of pesticides, contact the Maryland Department of Agriculture Pesticide Regulation Section at 410-841-5710, or you can email pest.reg@maryland.gov. This is Donna Kohl on the 1430 Connection. We'll see you next week.